Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Psych Monologues. I am Dr. Ray Mitsch, your host, and I am ever so humbled by the fact that you set aside some time to listen to this podcast. And to introduce it a little bit, Psych Monologues was created to be a podcast that looks at or initiates or instigates the conversation at the intersection of faith, psychology, and spiritual formation. And it's actually a place where we have a lot of conversations, actually. We just don't know that we're on an intersection. Hopefully we're not in a place on that intersection where we're going to get run down. But I think a lot of our questions of faith have embedded in them psychology and really the ultimate questions about where am I going and how do I do this and what is this that I'm talking about. So I'm like I said, I'm ever so appreciative of the time that you set aside to listen and to consider and to walk with me through a dialogue or a monologue like this. So pull up a chair, get comfortable, put your running shoes on and run if that's what you do, and relax, and let's talk about those things that are the most important, really, to our spiritual development. This is one of those rare moments where we're called to participate in our development. You know, kids, when they go through development, they don't have to be told to participate in it. They're just doing it. But when we get to this point in our development spiritually, we're called to participate in it, to work out our salvation with fear and trembling, as Paul says. So it's about where we live and think and how we feel about living with others and ourselves and ultimately our relationship with Jesus Christ. So I thought I would take a little time. This may not be as long as the last two. I will give you the update as far as last week was concerned. I spent some time talking about the nature of being broken and you know, the week has not been any easier. I'm not going to sugarcoat it or make it sound better than it is, because why would one do that other than to try to convince oneself of that it's better than it is? And there's no use to that because we're not really living in reality when we do some things like that. So it's been a tough week. There have been moments in time where let me put it this way. The way I described it to my groups when we talked on Wednesday and Thursday was, the intense pain of saying goodbye to Coda and his absence, and has decreased somewhat to a dull ache. And I think generally those that have gone through loss could probably identify with that, is that the intensity of the emotions that we feel at the moment of loss and the moment of saying goodbye wane over time. I think there's a certain mercy to that. Now, some people would say, well, you're in denial, and the one thing I always remind people about when we're talking about grief is that not all denial is bad. I mean, really, if anything, it gives us some emotional breathing room to loop back around and revisit various issues and things like that, and that's certainly been the case. I certainly can identify that I'm showing signs of the lingering grief that is a part of it. There are subtle things in our society that seem to suggest, and it's not intentional at all, but move on, replace whatever you've lost, and just keep going. And so there's not a lot of encouragement, I think, to just be honest about where we are. And some days are good, some days are bad. The old pop artist John Denver used to say, some days are diamonds and some days are stones, and that's kind of how this week has been in a lot of ways. But I see the effects, certainly, of grief, and we don't tend to recognize the physical symptoms of grief. We recognize the psychological and emotional ones, but we don't recognize the physical ones, like fatigue and like distraction and loss of concentration and things like that show up just as part of our overall system's reaction to the loss that we experience. So it's going a little bit better. Like I said, it's an ache that's manageable. And we go into the next week, and my attention certainly turns to the things that I have been kind of putting off and not paying attention to, and I need to get back to them and try to be as productive as I know how. Not the least of which is a writing project that I've been working on through the summer, which got hijacked by my father-in-law's death, and then also now with Coda's death. So it's been a challenge, no doubt. And the irony, the exquisite irony in this writing project is that it is about grief. So it will be near and dear as a journeying companion for a little bit of time here. So what I want to talk about tonight, I know that I have done an episode on this before, but there's something that has been kind of gnawing at me that I notice in people around me, and I find myself getting a little cranky about it. Not because I'm cranky at them, but it's regarding our seemingly intransigent unwillingness to allow things to be unstated. And what I mean by that is that we love to talk about mystery in the Christian faith, but do we really live like that? I mean, do we live with mystery? And of course, when we start talking about things like that, it seems like we chalk it up to that which we can't control. We might make the conclusion, well, it's just one of those mysteries of God or his relationship with us, and there really is no answer. But in our Western mind, that is just not an answer. We should be able to generate an answer of some sort, even a spiritual one, which oftentimes is cover for I'm confused, I'm unsure, my faith is waning, or I'm doubting, and I'm not sure I want to admit that part of it, so I'm just going to chalk it up and say it's a mystery. And I think there's a reason for this. And so many of the paths, I think so many of the paths lead back to this one particular issue, which shows itself time and time again. And you've heard me talk about it before, and it shows up under this kind of topic. Because one of the things that we hear, right, and Paul actually talks about, I was just looking at it this afternoon in preparation for tonight, is that God's love is mysterious, but what exactly does that mean? Because when it really comes right down to it, it means we can't explain it, which tends to reveal our strategy when something is mysterious. Something, and I think synonymously we would probably say it's unexplainable. But that's usually not good enough either. We seek to explain things. Now on that point, let me explain something about us. We hate, as humans, incompleted stories or pictures or other things like that. We really, really, really hate it. And so we fill in the gaps with something that would allow us to see it as reasonable or as even controllable, which ultimately is the core issue in here. So when we talk about something as being mysterious, generally it is pointing to the fact that we can't explain it. Now, when we talk about God's love being mysterious, the other thing I would say that tends to crop up in there is that it is loaded with something we love to talk about, but we really don't want to live by, and that is grace. Because it's loaded with grace, which completely confounds us. Because if you look around at your relationships or how you do things, generally our world around us is contractual by nature. It's a series of trades that if I do this, then you will give me that. And in Latin, it's referred to as quid pro quo, this for that. And God has this irritating way of turning the world on its head and turning our worlds on its head. And so when Paul talks about it being a mystery, by its very nature, it's uncontrollable because God does it with or without us, with or without our willingness to accept it. See, He offers it to us whether we accept it or not. Now, is it our choice to? Yeah, it is. Ultimately, it is our choice. But the love is still there. And even Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection stand squarely in the center of history that calls us to, this is what I'm going to do. You are so lost, you are so dead. I am going to make it so that you're alive. And when you're alive, you can choose whether to love me back or not, whether to love me or not at all. See, the interesting thing about this is that we are just like God. It's called the imago Dei, the image of God. And so when we wrestle with wanting to be chosen, wanting to be special, wanting to be loved, we are reflecting God's image because it's not that he needs it, but he desires it. He desires it. He created man to be in relationship with him. And it's not that we have a needy God, that he needs us to love him, but he wants to share something of himself in order to fulfill a need that he knows exists within us. But then we turn to others and want them to meet a need that ultimately God can only meet. And even when he does meet it, we are, as I said to somebody this week, we are leaky pots. We leak by the things that are poured into us. And so this idea of God's love being mysterious, or there are aspects of God that are mysterious that I just simply don't understand. And we have a choice to make. Either we go further and try to understand it, control it, or explain it, or we live in the wonder of the mystery of what is offered us. And see, that's a little tough for us to do. I think our Western mindset of we can figure it out, we can overcome this, and that really is the backdrop to our faith as well. Because if I can explain it, then I can predict it. And if I can predict it, then I can control it. And if I can control it, then I no longer feel at risk. Another word for risk is vulnerable, which we really hate, really. We love to talk a lot about vulnerability, and we love to create the appearances of vulnerability. But we really hate vulnerability because we lose control. And that's part of this issue that I think we only are beginning to scratch with talking about the aspects of our faith that are mysterious. Because mystery calls us to trust. And there aren't many people or beings in the universe that we're willing to trust. At least unconditionally. Now, I think it has to be said, humans are not worthy of being trusted unconditionally because they are notoriously unreliable, just like the person that you look in the mirror and I look at in the mirror. We're notoriously unreliable. And so God built into us and into our relationships aspects of his relationships with us, which includes forgiveness and repentance and reconciliation, is a means of refilling, if you will. So the big question here, when you have big questions of faith or doubt, is what do you do when you don't know? How do you respond? And we can walk out just so far to knowing things, and then we get beyond to a point where it is bigger than us. It's unanswerable, and then we're called to trust, and then we retrace our steps and go back to that which we know. Because they're ultimately one of the mysteries in our relationship with God is that it is something that is revealed, but it's not time for it yet. And of course, that aspect of it requires trust too. Because if I have no guarantee that it will be revealed, then why move forward? Versus moving forward, trusting that if it doesn't get revealed, then that's just the way it is. That's God's character, and God's heart for us is tender and loving enough for us that we don't have to go to resignation and say, well, I guess that's just the way it is. It doesn't matter anyway. No, it matters. It's just the very nature of who we are. We're curious beings, again, reflecting things of God. We like to understand and discover things. But the worst part about, oftentimes, explaining something is that once we explain it, it becomes mundane, familiar, and really unawe-inspiring, if that is such a word. So the alternative, as I've been implying here, is that the alternative to mystery is explanation. And it comes in a variety of forms. And like I said, we don't like incomplete characters. One of the things that I point out to my students is that I can put an arc on the whiteboard, and oftentimes I will ask them, what is that figure? And most of the time, a lot of the time, they will say it's a circle instead of an arc, because it's incomplete and they complete it. And most of our even our sensory systems are about completing things. And so we complete it by creating an explanation so that we feel comfort that we know. And oftentimes the way that we go about controlling the world around us isn't by manipulating, intimidating, or dominating people. It's about how we think about people. And so one way to explain God's character is spiritualizing everything. Now, I know when I walk out on that limb, there are lots of people that say, yeah, but what about life is not spiritual? And to that point, I would agree. I would assent on that point. But so often, there are things that occur or happen that are simply a revelation of God's character in the world around us, and it doesn't need any further explanation. It doesn't. I don't have to spiritualize it and say, this is what God has, this is why God's doing what he's doing, or whatever. I still probably don't know that. I'm just creating an answer so that I feel a little bit more comforted that I know what God's doing. Are we really willing to trust God's character enough to live without an explanation? Now, there's lots of things because of how wonderfully curious we are and how God designed us to steward the world around us. And the way that we go about stewarding the world around us is by knowing it, discovering it, and cataloging and understanding it. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with explaining either. So, I mean, you may be sitting or whatever in your mind's eye, scratching your head and saying, well, make up your stinking mind. Because you just said that explanation is extremely dangerous to living in the mystery. And that's true. But we seem so bent on explaining what's going on in order to create a sense of certainty, when certainty is not called for. Faith and trust are. That's it. Nothing else is really needed. See, it shows up. Here's another way that it shows up. It shows up in our if-then thinking. Like I said a minute ago, if I, then you. If I do this, then you will do that. That's contractual. And God did something that we know very little about or understand very deeply. We don't understand very deeply. And that whole thing is the idea of a covenant. Because he bound himself to us even when, Paul says, we were enemies to him. He loved us even when we were his enemies, which is covenantal thinking. In other words, I make clear, just like God did, about what it is I am going to do toward the person that I love. And I'm going to do that whether or not they act according to my dictates or my expectations or my demands. And see, that's really tough, because that is the danger of freedom. When I give someone freedom, I have to give them freedom for not only doing the things that I approve of and I think are quote-unquote right, but I also have to give them the freedom to do what's wrong, even if it's damaging to them, which is a real stretch for most of us, because we have kind of embedded in us this savior complex. And the reality is us trying to be a savior to someone else is a little bit like a kid putting a Superman cape on and swearing he's Superman. He can't fly, he has no strength, but he sure can look the part. And that's kind of us with our savior complexes. We would much rather save someone else from themselves than participate in our own salvation. And so our if-then thinking is a way of creating certainty in a world that is unsettlingly uncertain. And I'm called to trust something. Now, while some people will speak out of both sides of their mouth and say, I don't trust myself for anything, but ultimately they only trust themselves for their assessment and clarity of vision about the world around them, which means that they have a really hard time taking feedback. So we have a variety of ways, like I said a minute ago, we have a variety of ways of trying to explain things. If-then thinking is one of them. You know what the other one is, which is always my favorite, is either flipping off the rules or following the rules. Both are pretty much the same, really. Because if I flip off the rules, then I really am admitting that they really are important enough for me to really concern myself about them at all. But following the rules has an embedded if-then in it. Because if I follow the rules, then I'll get blessed. If I follow the rules as I can understand them, then I will get the things that I hope for. Or you'll behave the way I want you to. See, it shows up in our relationships as well. Whether or not we say what the rules are, quote-unquote rules are, or whether we soften them and say, well, they're not really rules, but they're expectations. And we can't walk into any human relationship or otherwise without expectations. It's really pretty hard to do because it is part of how we were designed to be as adaptable as we are. And so following the rules is just one way to do it. Like I said, flipping off the rules says that the rules are important enough to flip off. So both of them are errors, because the one is continues the contractual way of thinking. The other one says, if I throw off the rules, then that's what freedom is. But I trade one taskmaster or one slave master for another, because then I'm left with my own shame-driven ways of thinking about myself with really nothing to season it like grace or compassion or mercy or any of those things. And so my challenge to you is, if you're going to say that you're willing to accept the mystery of God's love for you, and you're willing to accept the mystery of his sovereignty over all things, even though sovereignty doesn't mean he orchestrates evil, doesn't mean that at all. And we're willing to trust the mystery of him giving us the freedom to not only embrace him in our relationship with him, but also willing, if you want to put it that way, for us to not choose him as well. Those are mysterious things, really, because logic would say that's just absolutely ludicrous to do something like that. But somehow we're always acting for an audience. Who knows what the audience is? Could be the internal audience. Most of the time it is. During adolescence, we call it the imaginary audience. Adolescents are consumed with how they look, and the smallest flaw is a major discredit to who they are and how they are. But we just simply internalize as adults. We just internalize that imaginary audience, and it usually, more often than not, turns into the voice of shame that says it's not what you do, it's who you are that's the problem. And God says, it's who you are that I love as you are, not as you should be, because you're never going to be what you should be, because shoulds are always built on other people's perspectives or a comparison of some sort. But I love you as you are because I see all of you. I see all of you, and I love all of you, in the plural and the singular. So, a few random thoughts for the evening for thinking about mystery, embracing mystery, because it takes us down the path of trust. And we might find that we don't have to explain everything. We just need to trust God's character, and that's not resignation. I'd send you back to a couple episodes ago when I talked about the difference between acceptance and resignation. It's not resignation. I continue to participate. I continue to be engaged. And I know that with each step down this journey, God's character will get more and more revealed. And some things that are mysterious may become even more clear. And other things that are mysterious will remain mysterious because it's calling me to trust. So that's it for tonight. I want to loop back and remind you about a variety of things I revealed last week that I was introducing a brand new nonprofit that you might want to partner with. And it's called Stained Glass International, or SGI, as I'm referring to it. And it is in the process of having standing with the IRS and in the state of Colorado, we're already a corporation. We're a nonprofit corporation, but it's an organization that is devoted to providing resources and retreats and training for the next generation of Christians. And those particularly that have despaired that there is anything authentic or real to be found in the church, or even in the Christians that populate the church. And so because of that, they've walked out looking for other places, and Stained Glass International is meant to provide the call to become pure glass people who can be seen and can be known and can know one another, creating those kind of communities of people. And it's what our heart all longs for. The previous generations have all landed on a particularly unique strategy for each generation, it would seem. Some conclusions that they've made that seem to be cut across all the people of that. Now, not all of them, because nobody can count the heads to know, but the general sense of it seems to be a sense of despair of ever being able to find something real, something that reflects the real Jesus that met with people at just where they were. Because granted, a lot of times the next generation Christians have a skewed, even stereotyped view of the Jesus that they were, quote unquote, sold or taught about. And that has to be redeemed and renewed as well. So SGI has come into existence, and it serves as to be a partner to help and come alongside of various groups of people, specifically the next generation of Christians. And that focus point right now is because I'm the founder and also the CEO of it is at CCU, because that is the current place that God has placed me to try to reach in and have a voice that meets young people where they are. So I mentioned that last week. That is the place where you can contribute. So the donation button on the current website at drmitsch.com will take you to a donation page that would support SGI as we continue to kind of coalesce our resources together and who we are as an organization to put on these retreats in partnership with CCU for currently enrolled CCU students. But if the opening is made possible by God to have other retreats for people outside of CCU, including our alums that go off into the world, that would also be an area that we would that I certainly would be willing to move more and more into. So that's the reiteration of the announcement. In terms of just the end of the podcast, if you have questions about some of the things I talked about with mystery and trust and explanation and control, please send them to me. You can do it on Instagram. You can do it on the website. There are ways to do that there. You can subscribe and follow us on any of the social media platforms. At Instagram, it's at the Psych Monologues, all lowercase. At Facebook, Ray.Mitsch, and LinkedIn, Dr. Mitch. Those are the three major social media platforms we're on, including the website at drmitsch.com, and you can subscribe and follow any of the new content that will show up there as we move along and continue to develop by God's grace. You can find us in any of the podcast places and platforms that you might use, including Spotify and iTunes and iHeartRadio or Amazon Music. Whatever you prefer, you can find us there. Stitcher is another one. So the other thing is that we started up a blog with a first entry by a young man, former student of mine that I've put him up to do some more writing for me. But myself and some other colleagues, a couple members of my board, namely Dr. Bill Saxby and others, I have encouraged to provide some direction, some thoughts, some reflections that would actually prompt further interest in that. So, and last but not least, as I've mentioned before, if you're interested in partnering with us to continue to grow the scholarship fund, not only for alumni, but other students in other universities to participate in the silent retreats. Please do so. You can use the donation button, and you'll receive a receipt that indicates that is a tax-deductible gift, and that will support our silent retreats. We're going into one this week, so I will have news of it when I get back next Sunday. It is a fresh group of students who are going with some measure of trepidation because they're new. They're completely new. I only have, I think, one or two veterans in there who have done it before. So it will be an exciting and fulfilling and certainly inspiring to watch a new set of students learn the basic ancient practices of our faith called silence and solitude. So that's a little bit of what is happening and coming to fruition as far as SGI is concerned. And you can give on the website to support us and continue continue to support our ministry to young people. I don't have a formal address yet. If you want to send a check, of course, you can do that in care of Dr. Ray Mitsch at Colorado Christian University. The address there is 8787 West Alameda, Lakewood, Colorado, 80226. You're welcome to send any support in a physical check. If you prefer to do that, you certainly can. Please stay tuned. There will be additional announcements about a place that you can send it to. A P.O. box is what I'm trying to get established so that we have some place for people to send correspondence, questions, and perhaps some means of supporting us further into the future. So thank you so much for considering that, prayerfully considering partnering with us. It would be ever so appreciated. And the students that go are ever so grateful to hear of donors that have stepped up to support them. Just by way of perspective, if you want to give and you want to support one student going to a silent retreat, the cost of that is $330. That covers room, board, everything for one of our retreats. Our retreats start on a Thursday evening. They conclude on a Sunday afternoon after lunch. And so that is kind of the target, but anything at all will do that will certainly support and grow our scholarship fund, making it doable for students to be able to go. So I think that's it for tonight. Thanks so much for joining me. It has been my pleasure and honor to have you set aside a half an hour of your time or so to listen to topics, hopefully, that encourage, inspire, and prompt reflection in your spiritual journey. So as always, love ya. Later. Bye.